Namaste friends and welcome to another session of Mahabharata Myths. So my name is Deepak, I'm an author and with me is my fellow author and co-host Pranshu Saxena. Over the last 8 weeks we have been bringing you episodes featuring myths from the greatest epic in the world. Now today we have a very special episode. We are going to talk about myths with bestseller author Ami Ganatra. Now before she joins us, I want to introduce someone special. So as you can see at the corner of this window, we have the logo of Sutradhar. So I want to bring in Gaurav Tiwari of Sutradhar. Namaste, Gauravji.
Namaste
Welcome to
Deepak,
our
Namaste
show.
Pranshu.
नमस्ते सर.
So Gaurav is collaborating with us, and together we are going to bring out more such shows. So through this, we are able to reach out to the thousands of subscribers that Gaurav already has established over the last 2 years. So Gaurav and his team, they have set up Sutradhar, which is a page which deals with our Sanatana Dharma, our culture, our heritage, and they're doing a lot of activities, including videos, quizzes, and so on. So thank you once again, Gaurav, for joining us.
Thanks
It will be
Deepak,
great
thanks for
working with
having me.
you. So now it's time to welcome our guest, author Ami Ganatra. Ami ji, namaste and welcome to
Namaste.
this
Thank
show.
you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
So before we start off, a quick introduction to our guest. So Ami Ganatra is an alumnus of Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and Veer Mata Jijabai Technological Institute, Mumbai. She has 14 years of experience in business consulting and has worked in different sectors. She is a student of Sanskrit and also a yoga practitioner. During the weekends, she spends time discussing texts on Itihasa and Adhyatma. So Ami is deep rooted in our Sanatana culture and our heritage. And most importantly, she has come out with a bestseller book known as Mahabharata Unraveled. Now, this is a book which is very different because both me and Pranshu also we are authors. Most authors, what we do, we retell tales from the Mahabharata. We take up an existing tale and then present it in a different perspective. But what Tamiji has done, he has packaged the entire Mahabharata and presented it in a capsulated format. She reminds us of the entire story. She delves into individual characters, individual episodes. She takes up concepts. So Mahabharata Unraveled is a very unique book, and it's no wonder that it is a bestseller. So first of all, congrats, Amiji. The book is a bestseller, and both Bloomsbury and you must be very happy with the success of this book. So in your book, you have extensively covered myths. So that is the reason why we requested you to join us today. Because over the few weeks, we have been talking about myths in the Mahabharata. Now, before we start out with today's episode, I would request Gaurav to step in here. Now, we have been talking about myths all these days. So, what is the importance of talking about myths? Why is it that we should focus on myths? What is the reason that we should spend such a lot of time unraveling myths from the Mahabharata? So, I request Gaurav to please share his views before we start.
Thank you Deepak. So one of the reasons we started Sutradhar was to basically bring in our ancient text and the heritage culture, I mean the culture that we have developed over centuries to our I mean new audience or whatever you call them, because the problem is that many of these people have not actually read the original unabridged text, and they go by whatever is presented to them. And one thing I realized that when you present something in the video format, people have the tendency to connect with it much more easily and believe whatever is told. And before starting this, I did a lot of research on YouTube and found a lot of content that is there, which is very badly researched. And it's basically people use clickbait titles, etc., and basically do whatever butchery they do with our text. So we thought that let us start building something which can basically present these stories, which are beautiful stories in the on their own. And one of the inspiration that I had honestly was Disney, because they keep presenting stories from all across the globe, these folklores. And most of these folklores have only one message, and it's that true love's kiss can solve all the problems. We have much more practical stories and with much more practical messages. And recently, I was reading Bhishma Niti, and few days back, I did a thread on Karnik's Kuti Niti. And I realized that when people basically watch this content, it is prepared from the entertainment perspective. And when you have entertainment as your focus, you basically filter out all these wisdom that is presented in these books, and that presents the message in a much more distorted way, if I can say, to the user. They are not able to understand why Yudhishthir did what he did, or why Draupadi did what she did. Because I mean, you see Yudhishthir going through the process of Vanvas, but you don't actually see how much guilt he had been living with because of what he had done in probably the intoxication of youth. So these are some of the things which we thought that it's important that it is brought to the common people, and these stories keep on influencing our culture even today. And as I was telling last time when we did a Twitter session, that there are some harmless myths, but then there are some very dangerous myths. So, for example, a harmless myth would be that Sri Krishna saved the Draupadi during in Dyut Sabha. I mean, that Sri Krishna is God. Probably he did, right? But it is not mentioned in Mahabharata per se in those many words. But then there are very dangerous myths. And one such example is that Drona rejected education to Karn because of his caste. And then this example is used by many people to present us as a casteist society. People pick up an example of Madri and then say, see, there was so much Sati Pratha in our ancient past. I mean, you have picked up the example of Madri but forgot about Kunti. So these are some of the things which need to be busted, and people need to be told the true story behind them, and much more importantly, the wisdom behind all these stories. And that is where Amizi, your book actually does a great job, and I really applaud the work you have done. And I was also telling Deepak that the Mahabharata tale stories that he has written, the good thing is that these stories present the wisdom but keep it entertaining, and that is where the crux lies, and that is what we are attempting to do. And we would also be writing some fictional content, but the fiction should complement the original story, not contradict it. So there was an example. I was talking to Deepak about conversation between Yuyuts and Vikarna's ghosts. He has written that conversation. It's very entertaining, and it actually complements the story. I mean, if you have read Mahabharata and read that story, you will probably believe it must have been there. You have missed it. That's how beautifully it complements it. And I'm glad that you guys have made me a part of this. And over to you guys. And I will definitely enjoy this conversation, and looking forward to it. Thanks, Deepak. Thanks, Pranshu.
Thank you.
And thank you, Amiji,
Thank you,
for
Bharat.
being a part of this.
So right, so let's start off with today's episode. So as we have informed, we are going to be having a discussion with author Amiji. We are going to talk about her book, and we are also going to talk about myths in the Mahabharata, many of which she has already brought out in her book. So now, Amiji, you are a management professional. You are into management consulting. So obviously, I'm sure one question you'll get is management and Mahabharata. What is the connection? But we know that there is a lot of links between the management and Mahabharata. There are even books written about Bhagavad Gita and management. So that is not something new. But being a consultant, how did you get the idea for this book? Because most people would like to start off with a fiction, a retelling or a story or something like that. How did you get the idea of this book? And most importantly, what inspired you to write?
So first of all, thank you for having me here. And I know that everybody sitting here is actually a Mahabharata expert. So I feel humbled to be in this company. I think the amount of effort and research that all of you put in studying our Shastras is really significant. And being a part of this group itself makes me feel very nice. So thank you for that. As far as writing of Mahabharata Unraveled goes, I think it's more it's more incidental. I was not thinking about writing a book, so to say, when I started reading the Mahabharata. I got interested in Sanskrit because of yoga. I have been practicing yoga for some time. Because of that, I got interested in Sanskrit. One thing led to another, and there were a lot of discussions always going on about Mahabharata. And there was always this thing that, um, the Mahabharata that we tend to listen here, that has come to us from mainstream media, you have all these characters which are very confused. Some of the myths which Gauravji already mentioned, right? The Ek Aur Pe, you see that Karna is this amazing guy, but somehow just picking up a caste, he's always being sidelined, he's being insulted, things like that. On the other hand, you have Yudhishthir, who's called a Dharmaraj, but his actions, from what we see at least, don't seem to show him as a Dharmaraj at all. Then why was he called a Dharmaraj? We are told of Draupadi. Somewhere we are told that Draupadi is one of the Panchasatis, Panchakanyas. On the other hand, Draupadi is this lady who's always wanting revenge, who's always angry, who doesn't know what to say, when to say, calls Andhika Prandha, and makes the war happen. So where is the truth? And in all these conversations, there was one which came up where somebody I know and I respect, we were talking about Mahabharata, and he said that, oh, you know what, Mahabharata is a very interesting tale, but it is of you North Indians. We South Indians have nothing to do with Mahabharata. And that got me thinking. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I mean, I had never thought of Mahabharata as a North Indian versus a South Indian text. And here is somebody who's actually telling me this, somebody who's extremely well read, somebody I respect. So I'm like, that can't be true, because when I had started reading Mahabharata by that time, there were lots of instances where so many mentions of places from South India have happened. There have been marriage allegiances between North and South and parts of India. And that said, I am from West of India, I'm from Gujarat. So to make it a North-South thing is like, oh, it's a North Indian text and we have nothing to do with it. So I was like, yeah, ye kya chal raha hai? So I used to start, during this lockdown, when they started playing Mahabharata again, I had started studying it long back, 2017 itself. I used to write posts saying that this is how it is actually in Vyas's Mahabharata versus what we typically know of. So I must say that the idea of writing wasn't mine. I have to give credit where due. Praveen Tiwari ji of Bloomsbury, it was his brainchild. And he said that Mahabharata, there's so much written on Mahabharata and it's usually fiction. Yeah, there are retellings. People pick up a story, talk about it, as Gauravji rightly mentioned. And he said, what you are writing is basically taking us back to what is in Vyas Rachit Mahabharata. Why don't you think of it? Why don't you conceptualize it as a book? So when he said that, I'm like, chalo, मैं लिख तो दूंगी, पढ़ेगा कौन? Yeah, so that was his question. How do I write a book? But he had more confidence in me than I had, and he said, "Nahi, likh do. Think of it, likh do." And then I think the whole writing process started. It helped that I was already studying it and reading it. So it was relatively easy to actually, not easy so to say, but it helped to then create the content that Mahabharata Unraveled has come up with.
Right. So actually the second question, like we had already discussed it in one of the, actually I think you listeners on the show actually asked the same question, is for a book like this, right? How the research obviously plays a very important role, right? So how like you have to present not only like from the bird's eye view of the Mahabharata. So what kind of research did you do when you approached to write it down? Like how did you frame it, how to conceptualize it, how to break it down, and which portions to highlight? So what was your thought process on that?
So I'll start with the research part and then I'll talk about the structuring part of it. Research wasn't as difficult because we are made to believe there are too many versions of Mahabharata and every version somehow is a valid version. You pick up any fiction book and that is also valid. Rashmi Rathi is also valid. Palace of Illusions is also valid. So then what is valid is the question asked, right? But frankly, if you separate out fiction written on Mahabharata versus Mahabharata text, because we have those texts. We have the Bhandarkar Oriental Critical edition of Mahabharata. That apart, there are other northern, southern recensions of Mahabharata as well. One which is captured in the Gita Press edition of Mahabharata, which has a Sanskrit shlok as well as a Hindi translation of it. In English, Vivek Debraj has done the translation of the Puri Critical Edition. But there are Bengal editions, the translation of which is done by K.M. Ganguly, which is available online also for free, right? So there are all these actual Mahabharata, which can be then classified as actual Mahabharata versus a fiction. So first step is clearing that. And it really isn't that difficult. We know what a Vyas Rachit Mahabharata. Now in Vyas Rachit Mahabharata, versions, if we start looking at some of those, there are some differences here and there. But I'll tell you, it was very fascinating when I started exploring some of this, that many things which we think are facts are not in any of these versions. Of course, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Gori, has done an extensive exercise over 50 years where they probably have the most consistent version of the Mahabharat Critical Vyas Rachit Critical Edition, where they had taken like 1200 plus manuscripts, and going
59,
through
yeah.
those manuscripts, they came up with the most consistent version, right? So that is one exercise. But if you look at that version versus Gita Press version as well, of course, there are some incidences which are more in Gita Press version, which you don't find in critical edition, so to say. But then it's only those, yeah? Things like what we discussed, the character of Draupadi, or the character of Karn, or the character of Dharmaraj, they are still consistent across all these versions, yeah? So it wasn't that difficult to say which myth do I pick and which fact do I pick. Because some of the myths prevalent are actually just fictions, which we know where they come from, right? So it wasn't so difficult. That's the first part. Second part on the structure. So Mahabharata has a lot. One is the story per se, then the other is just the discourses that have happened, right? Just Vidur Niti hai, Bhishma Niti, as Gaurav mentioned. There is Bhagavad Gita. Then there are lots of backstories, especially Adi Parva. You see, a large part of it is just backstory leading up to the birth of the Pandavas and all that. So my focus then was that let's take the story per se for now, yeah, rather than getting into the discourses. Of course, I took bits and pieces of it because I thought they were really interesting. The Shanti Parva, some piece of Shanti Parva, some part of Vidur Niti, also Yaksha Prashna. So I've taken those, summarized them, but the large focus was on talking about the story, focusing on some of these questions which had kept coming. One which I myself had, yeah, that were our rishis so confused to call Yudhishthir se Dharmaraj when he actually, to our common understanding, was it? Yeah, some of these topics. So I wanted to ensure that these questions get answered about Mahabharata first, rather than getting into the philosophical discourse of it, which is also equally important, but not the focus of this book, so to say. So I had to separate it out that way.
Right. And so one of the questions actually, one of the listeners was asking is, how do you define which is the Ved Vyas version? So actually, all of the Mahabharata recisions we have, Dakshinatya or the Northern Edition or KMG or Bori Critical Edition, they are all actually the Ved Vyas versions only. So and even the later like texts like the Jamini Ashwamedh Parv are basically a Ved Vyas version only from the Jamini's point of view. And so basically, so that's one of the questions that somebody was asking. So and that's what you have answered is correct, because if you actually boil it down, Dakshinatya, Northern Edition, and Critical Edition complement each other very well. Exactly, there is no change in the tenor or story. I would just point out, like, Gaurav was talking about Kanik, right? Kanik Niti. That other day, I think, or just like a few minutes back. Sorry about that. So you're talking about Kanik, right? So Kanik doesn't come up in the critical edition because, but he's there in both Dakshinatya and Northern editions. So some minor character may not be there, but overall the story and the inherent integrity of the characters is exactly the same right across. So I think Deepak had a
Just to
question.
add to that, Pranshuji, right? So the consistency of characters is there, and that is the most important part to my mind, because a lot of times it is said about Mahabharata that the point people say Mahabharata underscores is everything is great. सब में अच्छा भी होता है, सब में बुरा भी होता है. So there is no right, there is no wrong. Everything is great. Yeah, this is what is a takeaway for a lot of people. Now that is not true. Mahabharata is a book on dharma, and it very clearly explains what dharma is supposed to be without any confusion. What is right, what is wrong, and all these actual Ved Vyas versions with a little bit of little bit of differences here and there in certain instances come exactly to that conclusion only. So there is no difference in that part of the
Exactly.
Okay, Amiji, let's come to the topic of myths, which we have been covering in our show. So we are actually planning to talk about Barbaric in the last myth, the 18th myth in our series. But incidentally, that is the first myth which you deal with in your book. You have dealt with many myths about the Mahabharata. And as you know, these have created misconceptions about the epic itself and about the characters. Now, of all the myths that you have studied, why do you think these myths have come up? And would you blame the TV show for this? What is your view on this?
From what I see, Deepak ji, this tradition of taking stories from the kathas from our shastras and retelling them is not a new practice. Yeah, we've seen that happen in our natyas as well. Be it be done by be done by Kalidas in Abhignan Shakuntalam, or the one where actually Urubhanga, one of those texts, right? Where
Urubhanga.
where it is spoken about Draupadi actually washing her, or rather,
Veni Samhar.
Veni Samhara, sorry, Veni Samhara,
Veni
yeah,
Samhar, yeah.
where Bhim actually takes blood and uses it to wash
Shampoo.
Draupadi's hair. Now she hasn't asked for it. She didn't ask for it, right? And this incident where Bhim actually takes the blood and puts it on her hair is also not there in Mahabharata. But we see that it is there in Veni Samhara. So in our Natyas, or for example, Abhignan Shakuntalam, as I was saying, right? The character of Shakuntala in actual Mahabharata versus Abhignan Shakuntalam is also slightly different. In Mahabharata, she's a lot more feisty and, she goes very assertive, fights for her rights. Whereas in Abhignan Shakuntalam, she has a softer character, so to say. So this kind of retellings have happened for a long time. Now, because our texts are so old, some of these myths have come over time due to retellings and folklores that get attached to Mahabharata. We'll talk about Barbaric later, but Barbaric is one such folklore, right, which gets attached to the story because of the narration in certain parts of the country that have happened. Now, that has happened. Now, what we've seen is in the last 100 years or so, or actually last 75 years or so, a lot of authors have used Mahabharata to communicate certain messaging or to do certain messaging. I think that is where some of the problems start happening, because here now what we are doing is we are looking at the problems of today and projecting it on our past, right? For example, the biggest is the caste thing, where Karn is supposed to be this caste warrior, and today he's actually become the caste warrior. So if somebody wants to fight for caste rights, they use Karn, which is the most ridiculous thing, because if there is one person who's casteist, so to say, Karn would appear in the top list in Mahabharata.
Yeah, the Shalya Samvad, yeah.
Correct. But that has happened now, and people then use the messaging used by authors to create their fiction stories, that is used to then say, "Arey, Sanatan Dharma is like this only." Everything, anytime anything is wrong in the country, people say, "Arey, Hindu Sanskriti hi aisa hai, hamara to tradition hi aisa hai," right? And they will use that basically to lash us, whip us every now and then, without really understanding what the text is. And what my understanding has now been is that we've reached where we have because we have forgotten what the Shastras tell us, not because of the Shastras, right? So what I was saying is, I don't necessarily blame any one thing for where we are. It is not even, I wouldn't even say right or wrong. I think people have written what they had to write. Some of these texts, even I love, like the Palace of Illusion. I actually love the writing in that, right? It's a very well written book, even though it falls in the fiction category. So that creative writing has to happen. I think where we slipped, or what, if at all, if I have to blame something, I would say I would blame us for not keeping or not continuing to read the Shastra for what it is. Fiction to hote rahega, but we have to read the Shastra for what it is. And now there, if you see, right, we had this superstition, if I may say, that Mahabharat ghar pe rakhoge to ladai ho jayega. You're not supposed to read the Mahabharat only. A book which is on dharma, we relegated it to saying don't read it because it creates clash in the family, right? So there I would actually say I thank B.R. Chopra for bringing Mahabharat back to masses the way he did. And that is the reason why actually even we are going back and exploring our text. I might have an issue with certain portrayals. I might have an issue with certain masala that has been added to it. But that apart, I think it has been a service that is done to the nation and the culture at large. Now it is on us to then say, Acha, what is right versus what is actually in the text versus what is fiction, and create more matter content on the actual version of the Shastra.
And exactly, and that's where like Sutradhar and their videos come into very big, because the future of education is going to be audiovisual. A lot of it is going to be audiovisual because the people are already attuned to basically absorbing information now basically through visual means. So we can't put the genie back in the bottle. Like, that's how the future is going to be. 200 years from now, I don't know the books or even the text will remain. It will all be audio visual communication. So that's where Sutudar videos come in,
And
even 3-4
I,
minute ones, telling that story. And
I think it's also ease of access. People don't want to put hard work. I mean, if something is delivered to their WhatsApp inbox, they are happy to consume it and probably will share it also. There are very few people like you, Pranshu, who like read 15 versions of Mahabharata and yet want to consume more. But most of the people want to consume it in bite size. Like, and with mobile generation, the attention span is also reducing, right? Everybody wants everything in 2 minutes. And I mean, that is where we thought that we'll probably be able to preserve it in probably bite-sized form, but at least the entire thing in some shape and form would be available and easily accessible. And yeah, so that's what it is. I mean, when something is presented as a video, as an entertainment, a lot more people consume it than if you talk about the philosophical aspect of it, or let's say the wisdom, the knowledge aspects of it. And I mean, there is Gita, which a lot of people read and consume, but I doubt that many of the people actually understand it. And but Mahabharat, not many people read, and Amiji very accurately pointed out that many people have this belief that keeping Mahabharat at your, in fact, my mother was telling me that you shouldn't keep Mahabharat at your home. And I was like, लड़ाई होनी होगी तो वैसे ही हो जाएगी, महाभारत की वजह से तो certainly नहीं होने वाली.
no, so I would joke. Somebody would say that I would joke back the Ramayana ही रखनी चाहिए because वरना तुम्हारी बीबी को कोई उठा के ले जाएगा. But then many Indians will deliberately put Ramayana.
क्या पता कोई ले जाए.
So but yeah, but you're right. Like, and again, that is the way basically we have to approach all of this, is that by making it little like humorous, little bit more entertainment attached to it, even telling the lessons. For example, the Ghosh Yatra.
I mean, my only point is that in order to keep the entertainment factor high, don't sacrifice the rest of the story.
Yeah.
I mean, the rest of the story is actually way more entertaining. When I read Mahabharat, to be frank, I think that B.R. Chopra could have done a much better job. I mean, when I was watching it, I was really fascinated that wow, something interesting is happening, and I was very young, right? And in my village, there was only one TV at my place, and there would be like 50 people sitting in that one room watching Mahabharat. And it was really fascinating. But when I read the unabridged version, and any of the version, I have read Gita Press, I have read KMG, and I am now reading Vivek Debray's version. I mean, which is basically a translation of critical edition. I find it that there is so much more, and when I visualize it, I find those scenes happening in much better way than B.R. Chopra did. Right? In fact, right now I was reading Virat Parv, and I was imagining how it would have been and how it was shown on TV. I mean, it could have been really out of the world, and no way it could have been achieved in that day's technology. To be fair to B.R. Chopra ji also, but now we have the technology. Maybe we can create something extraordinary out of these. And
Right.
that is when
सब
people
कुछ वो
also
करते
enjoy
थे,
it.
सब कुछ वो करते थे, तो हम क्या करते? अच्छा है ना, तो kept some space for
हम
us.
करेंगे, हम करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं.
So you
Hopefully करेंगे.
So you basically did talk about this point, right? Ki you were visualizing the Virat Parv and how, and B.R. Chopra presented it. And one thing comes into mind is that basically uh, there was the episode where Draupadi and Kichak have the conversation, and though Rupa Ganguly did a very good job right across, I felt in there she did not properly portray that's, or maybe the Rahim Masoom Raza maybe missed a little in putting a little bit of wrong dialogues in her in that sequence. And this is where it comes into the next question: is there's so many myths about Draupadi in your book, right? And I mean, it is true that the Draupadi's image has suffered because the myths spread about her, and she's being blamed as the cause of the war, which she's definitely not the cause of the war. So why do you think a lot of these myths are targeted especially against Draupadi?
Well, I would be. So there are lots of myths targeted against Draupadi. That is a fact. and I don't want to get into any author's head and try to justify or understand what they had in mind. But I think somewhere Draupadi as a character has fascinated people. She's one of these most beautiful women out there. And it's almost assumed that because she is beautiful, she has to be a rebel. And when we think of women empowerment, we have to show her as a rebel somehow. Yeah, so she does what she wants to do. She says what she wants to say. She falls in love with Karna, as it's shown in some of the books, right? She says Antika Putra and then leads to war. Because the other thing is, we say Jar Joru Jameen is the cause of war. So here the Joru part comes in. So she says it, and hence Duryodhan's ego is hurt. Now it's very fascinating, right? Somewhere I see that such narrative goes into shaping of how we think about our social problems in general. Even if for a second, if I assume that Draupadi says Andhe ka putra andha, right? Using that to say that she's the cause of the war itself is not right. Because it's not as if the fight started after Draupadi. The fight had been going on forever, right? Even when they were kids, Duryodhan tried to poison Bhima and kill him. Lakshagraha happened much before that. So why is all of that forgotten? And this one incident is pinned on her and told that she is responsible for the war. Now it is shown so because in the television you see that then Yudhishthir is unhappy that she said this, and he's trying to sort of make up for it or whatever. And he tells her that, why did you say this? Now, the fact of the matter is, no version of Mahabharata has this incident given. Draupadi never says Ante ka putra andha. For all, in all probability, she's not even there at that point. Yeah, nobody says Ante ka putra.
Yeah, most of it arose out of an anti-nuclear war. Dharamveer Bharati's, anti-nuclear war actually take on that. And it's nothing to do even with the woman or to that. It was,
Absolutely.
and it was Krishan who basically says even in Dharamveer Bharati's Andhe ka putra andha. This is a blind king's kingdom. Everybody is blind. So it's actually Krishan, not Krishna, who says that. And again, see, so it's maybe easier to blame the woman, right? And so that's
exactly, and that has masala also, right? Because then somehow. That's the other thing. As I was saying, right, some of these things shape how we see our society. I think a lot of people, when they write about Mahabharata, they just fail to believe that Duryodhan and gang could fall to such levels that अपनी भाभी को निर्वस्त्र करने का करेंगे, है ना? They just couldn't believe कि ऐसा कर सकते हैं. So you have to give a justification to it. Now the justification to that is Draupadi did it, hence it is justified, right? Like we see. अरे बेचारे टेररिस्ट वो शस्त्र क्यों उठाए? Because Indian state was the villain there, right?
Yeah.
And why would he do that? And that is how we say, अरे वो तो बेचारा headmaster का बेटा था. It is
I
not.
think revenge is an easy justification when it comes to Bollywood. So revenge is easily understandable, and that is why most of the Bollywood narratives bring in that angle, no matter which story it is. Whether it is girlfriend's father or whatever, I mean, the revenge has to be the motive for everything.
It is not only like an Indian phenomenon.
Isn't justified कि अच्छा ऐसा हुआ है, hence अगर सामने वाला, if the terrorist picks up a shastra, it's fine, है ना? Hence Duryodhan and gang, if they disrobe her, it's fine. And then
it's shown as a reaction to something rather than the something that came out of their own will. And it's honestly, you are right. It's very difficult to understand. If you have read the Mahabharata text, then you would actually go through the journey Duryodhan goes through, right? He talks a lot about it. He talks to Shakuni about it. There are so many conversations which have been filtered.
He builds a new 1,000 pillar thing. It takes him about 6-7 months to build that palace, right, at Jayant, where the Dut is held. So this is not something somebody doing out of like
impulse में नहीं होता.
Impulse, exactly. There's no impulse here. This is actually a
very planned.
But जो Draupadi का है ना, I would say that is mixed. I don't think Duryodhan intended to do that.
Correct.
That was Karna.
Correct. That was Karna who instigated,
taking over control there.
I mean, Shakuni prompted the bet, and Karna actually prompted the disrobing part.
Correct. And that
Duryodhan did not get involved, to be honest.
That people say Draupadi loved Karna. There was something going on between them, right? He loved her and she loved him. And I was like, do you guys even know? He is the one in the entire Mahabharata who calls Draupadi Bandhiki. The only one who's ever called Draupadi prostitute for marrying 5 people, right? And he says,
Correct.
ki ek ambar dharava vivasrava, doesn't matter how you get her. Without clothes also, if you get her, doesn't matter, because she's anyways a bandhiki. So there is no ashcharya in getting her naked as well, right? Then he is the one who says, get the upper garments out of everybody. And then the whole thing happens. So that actually, I don't think even Duryodhan had thought of it. This
Yeah.
just played out in the game, prompted by Karna.
I think even
And
Karn
then how do
also
you
didn't
justify
think
Karna?
about it.
By- Yeah.
I
No,
think
so-
even Karn also did not plan and think about it. He was responding to Vikarn when he was saying this, right? Because Vikarn made a point that how can you do this, and then Karn said something, and I think Karn's character is something that he gets carried away when he is basically under anger
5
or
दिन में
ego.
सबको मार दूंगा.
Yeah,
5 दिन
so
में
he
सबको
gets
मार
carried
दूंगा,
away,
वरना
and
मैं
maybe
Then, this
See?
to do something of this sort means something might have been going in his head for a long time. It shows
that-
how much hatred he had for
Correct.
the Pandavas, right?
Yeah.
Even if
Correct.
it was impulsive, it shows the kind of
The
hatred
hatred part,
the
yes.
person has in him, right? Now, the other thing to
Agreed.
justify this, they'll say, oh, Draupadi says Sutam na varyami. Hence, ego hurt of Karna, and hence justified, right?
even that
So
is
Draupadi-
disputed to Sutam na
Exactly.
Varyami.
Now, Sutam na Varyami is an interesting one, because in Gita Press you actually have Sutam na Varyami, right? You don't have it in the critical edition. You don't
So
have it
even
in
in
the
Gita
Southern
Press,
edition.
Ami, it contradicts, right? In the
No,
second
actually,
page,
yeah.
it
I'm
contradicts.
just coming to
in
that.
Gita Press.
I'm just coming to that. So in Gita Press, then they actually have a note saying that although we've written it because it was there in the manuscript, it doesn't fit well. Why? Because before and after, many times people are heard saying that Are Karna, Shalya, Duryodhan, none of them could string the bow.
Karn
and this
himself says.
happened.
Karn himself says later on, I couldn't do it.
Correct. And later on, when when Draupadi is taken away, and this Drupad sends a pandit to the potter's home, and he asks Yudhishthir, saying that, okay, who are you? Introduce yourself. Are you a Brahman? Are you a Kshatriya? Are you a whatever? Are you a Vaishya, or are you a Shudra? We just want to know who you are. And Yudhishthir says this question actually is not valid anymore, because when you actually did the Swayamvar, you did not ask for the Kula, Jati, or anything of whoever participated. You only said whoever strings the bow, right? So all this is not consistent with the Sutam na Varyami to begin with. But again, I will say, even if she had said that it was a Swayamvar, she had to right to say what she wanted to say or whom she married. To use that to justify what was done to her is absolutely misplaced. And if that is the idea people have in their mind, it shouldn't be there. She still could have
This
said
is
it a lot
something
after
most
She was
of the
younger
women-
than Sadev. She was younger than Sadev, and Karn had children the age of Sadev by that time. So any woman will not be wanting a husband which is so much older, right? Just from the
Yeah, he was at least 21 year older than Yudhishthir, probably, right? If you see
about
the
12 to
timeline.
16 than
Not
Yudhishthir,
so-
and about 25, almost
Correct.
25 than the Nakul Sadev. So
Nakul,
basically that.
So I mean, and this is something which most of the women of today's era are fighting for, right? The right to choose their husband. And when Draupadi did it, the same people have a problem with it. How can you refuse? Oh my God! So this really contradicts, and
Gaurav, this
basically,
point you mentioned, the thing that you mentioned, right? That actually Mahabharata, we don't need masala to make it entertaining. By itself, Mahabharata is quite not just entertaining,
It
but
is.
also very encouraging. For example, whenever we talk of Draupadi, we only talk about Vastraharan, right? We only talk about Sutam na Varyami, some of these episodes. But Draupadi had so much more of a personality than just these episodes. There is this Samvad with Satyabhama, where she talks about her role as the queen of Indraprastha, right? It's beautiful. You see, like we talk about women empowerment and all that. Here you have a woman who's empowered, who's like the chief operating officer of the entire Khandan, right? Of the entire kingdom, so to say.
in the press,
The
yeah.
way she managed it. So there's a lot more going on for Draupadi than these couple of episodes, which are used to then say कि अरे Indian women, Indian स्त्रियों पे तो हमेशा अत्याचारी होता था. They were always used as stakes to be thrown off, somebody to be staked off in a Dyut Krida. नहीं ऐसे नहीं था. Even the episode of Dyut is to be understood properly. It is not as simple as saying अरे सब दाव पे लगा दिया, क्योंकि दाव पे तो सबके लगाने के end में उनको लगाया था. Even after
Correct.
Yudhishthir lost himself.
He
Right?
bet on himself also before he started
Absolutely.
talking about
Absolutely.
Draupadi.
Okay, so
So
since we have been
I think
talking
the
about
Dute
Karna,
episode honestly is more about the intoxication the Dute causes to you, and it probably is to show how the Dute can harm you. It's worse than alcohol. I mean, your mind plays tricks on you, and you do things that you would probably not do in your right state of mind. And if you think
That
about
is,
it that way,
huh.
then it's probably a cautionary tale, right? Even
But that
Yudhishthir
is
could
one
not
thing.
control himself.
But that is one thing. I would say there is another aspect to it. Because now he had started playing. He was already
Hmm.
in Hastinapur, right? He was under the king's instructions to play. He could
Yes.
not have stopped till the game was stopped. After
Yeah, he could
losing
not have
himself, he
backed out.
actually,
Correct.
yes, and after losing himself, he actually said, I have nothing more to stake. When Shakuni says,
Correct.
Draupadim Padaswa, stake Draupadi, right?
Hmm.
There also to actually invoke emotions in the courtiers. Duryodhan goes on to describe, Yudhishthir goes on to describe what a great woman Draupadi is, hoping
Yes.
somebody will intervene. Nobody does, right? And this whole episode plays out. Now, there's another aspect to that. If say Yudhishthir had not staked Draupadi at that point, what would have happened? Was she not
Karan
already
answers
stuck?
this question, to be honest.
No, so we will not be talking about Arjun and Bhim. We'll be talking about Sutsom and Shutkarma as the great heroes who basically, with their mother, came and defeated. See, you see, it.
No, no,
So
That's
no.
she would have,
Pranju, actually,
naturally, she would have become a slave,
there is a
right?
verse by Karn where he actually says, when this question is asked that whether Yudhishthir even had the right to stake Draupadi, then Karn says that whether she is a dasi or she is a wife of a dasi, she still is a
Correct.
that's
dasi.
yeah.
So had
Correct.
he not staked Draupadi, her fate was already sealed, and it could have been even worse,
Exactly.
because
Exactly. They would
if she
have
was
become slaves forever.
yeah, because she was brought to the sabha, because she became the question herself. She was brought to the sabha, and so much hangama happened. But had it not happened, then it would have happened somewhere in corners, right? Some dark corners of the Hastinapur palace. But her fate was sealed. Had
In
she
fact,
not
because of
been
the
stayed.
hangama, there was a chance to get out of the
Correct.
situation. So,
And
in a
Yudhishthir
way,
says that because of
Devi
Draupadi, we were
Bhagwat,
saved.
that's what Devi Bhagwat says, that basically Yudhishthira didn't want to, you cannot actually shed the blood of the kinsman. It's one of the worst crimes you could do to your own soul and your own karma. And so they had to themselves break the things. So in Devi Bhagwat, it's Vyas, Krishna, which is Draupadi, and Yudhishthira who planned this out. That okay, let's see if they break that boundary, if they cross that boundary. When they cross the boundary, we will kill them. Then even
actually, in
after
the
that,
Gita
Yudhishthira
Press
gave them.
edition, it's not in the critical edition, I think. In the Gita Press edition, there is a mention saying that when Draupadi doesn't want to come, through a messenger, through a trusted messenger, Yudhishthir sends a message saying that you come crying. There's a small mention there in one shlok in
Listen,
Gita Press
if
edition. I don't think it's in the critical.
Neelkant basically puts it in, and then it's there in Devi Bhagwat also, which also Vyas also basically instructs the Draupadi in that. So basically, there is the idea that let's see if they cross the line, and after that also Yudhishthira says let's give them 13 more years to repent, and only Shakuni repents in that period. So that's very part of it. Actually, yeah. Uh, we were actually on the same topic about it, like who initiated the whole thing, Karn. So Deepak, you had a question, right?
yeah, yeah. So since we are talking about Karna, so there's no doubt that he's one of the most complex characters in the Mahabharata. There are people who call him a hero, and there are others who project him as an anti-hero. Now you have come out with a very interesting chapter called as the friendship of doom. So you call the relationship between Karna and Duryodhana as the friendship of doom. So can you please elaborate a little bit more on that? And most importantly, can you talk about why there are so many myths about Karna? Why is it that there is a glorification of Karna? Do you think it is because people like to glorify the underdog?
So I'll take the first one because second one, then we can keep chatting. It's a more interesting part, the myth one part, right? So I called the chapter "The Friendship of Doom" because in a way, Vyasji has hinted to that. You may not still find it in the critical edition, but in the Gita Press edition, he describes Yudhishthir and Duryodhana as trees, right? So he calls Yudhishthir the tree of Dharma, and he calls Yudhishthir the tree of Manu. Manu is rage, anger, yeah, all of that.
Duryodhan,
And
yeah.
he says the roots of this tree of Duryodhan is Dhritarashtra. And the skandha, the trunk which holds that tree, that makes it stand, is actually Karna. So it's actually Vyas Muni himself who has acknowledged that this whole whatever happens with Karna is whatever happens to Duryodhan, Karna has played a very, very big part to it, right? That is one. Second, we always talk about loyalty of Karna to Duryodhan. Yeah. Now the question to ask is, what is the role of a friend? Is the role of a friend to use your friend as a ladder to get your revenge and prove your worth? Or as a friend, you should be interested in what is good for your friend, right? So everything that Karna did, if we analyze it one by one, we will see that while overtly he seemed to massage Duryodhan's ego, his actions eventually led to the fall of Duryodhan and the destruction of his entire family, right? That is what caused the doom. Because in most of these cases, frankly, coming to the war, so to say, Duryodhan thought he could win because of Karna to a large extent. And Karna kept bragging. I will to, like Kartikeya destroys Tarkasur, I will destroy them. Like the lion kills the ox, I will go and kill all of them, right? Now, when it came to proving his worth, he failed most of the times. Not to say that he was not a good warrior. He was a great warrior, no doubt about it, right? But he had his own issues, and whenever it came to fighting against Arjun, or for that matter even Bhim, he lost out. So whenever it came to prove his worth, like we saw in the Ghosh Yatra as well, right? He runs away. Duryodhan is captured by the Gandharvas and he runs away saying that, I was hurt. So even there he's not proven himself. But when it comes to, again, discussing whether they should go for a war or not, when everybody is advising Duryodhan, ki, "Arey bhai, tu aisa mat kar. Think about the consequences," including Dhritarashtra. Even in the end, Dhritarashtra also tries to convince him. Shakuni tells him. Still he doesn't listen, right? Why? Because Karna is like, "Arey, you don't worry, I'm there. No. You don't worry." Even when this division of Hastinapura and Indraprastha had happened, right? That was the best thing they could have done. Give whatever was the hak or adhikar of Pandavas, give it to them. It was a barren land which was given to them, right? They accepted it. That was the best thing to do. Even there was only one person who said, "Arey, don't listen to Bhishma." Karna tells Dhritarashtra that don't listen to Bhishma and Dronacharya. They are not in your interest. You don't give this away. Yeah, Karna is the only one. He's a young guy who is an outsider, so to say, to all these matters, but still he intervenes. So eventually, this whole leading up to the war and massaging Duryodhan's ego to make this happen is what Karna has done. Now, in that, chalo, theek hai, he wanted to make the war happen, wo to samjhe. But then eventually, when the war did happen, he knew the war was going to happen, right? And when Indra comes to take away or to ask him for Dan, right? Eventually तो मालूम था ना कि वॉर होने वाला है कभी ना कभी. He wanted it. Still he gave away his Kavach Kundal. Now people think of it as a charity. Okay, fair enough. It's not easy to pull out what is yours and give it away. For sure, lot of shaurya required there. But पहली बात तो he didn't do it for free. He asked for Indrastra. In fact, he already knew that this is going to happen. Even then, there he did not think about his friend. Ki my friend is depending on me for a war, right? And this is my strength. There he thought about his own greatness. And he said, "No, I am a Danveer, so I have to give Dan. That is my principle. So I will do it." Acha, uske baad, when the war is about to happen, they are there, they have reached Kurukshetra, and there is this ego tussle between Bhishma and Karna. Because Bhishma says that Karna is not even a Maharathi, not even a Rathi, not because of his fighting skills, but because of his swabhava. He's very impulsive, he's very rash. So he's not even a Rathi. What does Karna do? He says, "Fine. Yavat Jivati Gangeya na yotse. I will not fight till Gange is alive." Arey Baba, you wanted this war to happen, and now you've made an ego issue out of it. And 10 days, your friend is out there fighting a war, and you are sitting here just because of your ego. What kind of a friend you are? It is one thing to claim and speak loyalty. The other thing is to display when you must, right? So both in action and both in actual intent, Karna, to my mind, was not even a good friend. In fact,
Yeah.
they both only aggravated the tamas of each other.
Yeah, on the fifth day when Duryodhan was like fainted in front of Bhim, right? Bhim could have just right there and then, oops, dropped his gada, and that's the end of Duryodhan. There will be no, like, Karan doesn't even need to come to war at that point in time. So you see, that way, that is something which comes out like, a very, very in stark contrast and what is good for Duryodhan, but Karan is basically just looking after what is good for me. So that actually we have a lot of questions from the listeners. So let's just one final question from us is, so what do you think is the most harmful? Which myth basically gives the most harmful, is most harmful to the basically, well, general discourse on Mahabharat, general social understanding of Mahabharat?
I think this whole thing around the jati pratha, the caste pratha, right, where Duryodhan is made the victim of the caste system. I
Karan.
think that's the most, Karna is made the victim of the caste system. That is the most dangerous. Because somewhere, as we know, right, today people are fighting for Karna's right. Now, the thing is, he was a Suta, which is assumed to be a Shudra. Also, I think somewhere, V.R. Chopra Mahabharat, they keep calling him Sut Putra as if it was an insult. Actually, aisa nahi hai. There, it was in Mahabharat, everybody, wherever they come from, Vidur is called a Kshatta, right? So they are used by the community that they come from, and it is not insulting.
And Sutputra Sanjay says about Karna, ki Sutputra,
Exactly.
Sutputra is calling his charioteer, and he says Sutputra called Sutputra, his charioteer
Correct.
Sutputra. So it's like Sutputra
Correct.
and triplet there, with Sutji actually telling the story.
So it's like
Exactly.
people calling me Tiwari while I was in college, right?
हाँ, but
It's
Tiwari
exactly
तो
the
चलो
same
आपका
thing.
ही हो गया ना. That's what now.
No, I'm saying
just,
it could be anything. It's just an identity for him, right? It's not
Yeah.
used as a
Correct.
derogatory term, but the way people say it in TV serial, it sounds like they are insulting him. While it is
Correct.
not the case. In the text, the sound doesn't come, right? So in the text, you can
Absolutely.
actually be more objective.
And even the additional part to that is, what is Sooth itself? Is Sooth really what they make out to be a...
It's not defined. I mean,
Brahmani and
Mahabharat
Kshatriya.
serial
It's
doesn't
a
define
Brahman
it.
Kshatriya mixed race. Brahman Kshatriya mixed race, right? Let's look at other Sutas in Mahabharat. The person who, through him, we know Mahabharat.
Draupadi's sons are Sutas.
Right?
Draupadi's sons are Sutas. Kshatriya and Brahmani.
Draupadi is still, as in we consider her Kshatriya only, no?
Yayati.
No, Brahmani. No, Dishdaman says, no, we are Brahmins. Dishdaman claims his Brahmanhood. So if his twin sister has to be...
At least at that point,
even Yadu would be a Suta, right?
But the Yadavs.
Yadavs are
exactly,
Sutas.
The Yadav, Krishna, they are all Sutas, right?
And that's the charioteer.
Acha, now within Mahabharat, right? Within Mahabharat, let's see. So one is Ugrashrava Sauti, who is a Sut, who's telling us, who's a Rishi, who's telling us this. Kichak, who's a Senapati. Sudeshna, right? They are Sutas themselves. Now, if this was Sutas was, so oppressed a category or jati and nobody liked them and all that, why would Sudeshna's daughter be married to Arjun's son? Right? If they were so caste, jati obsessed, right?
No, even Pandavs, well, Kekai, right? Kekai king, Drishtketu, Sardamyani, he's a Suta. They are all basically.
So that's what even in Sutas, Sarathi was one of the professions. They were Kathavachaks, they were warriors, as we see in Kichaks as well. There were lots of kingdoms which were Suta kingdoms as well. So they learned.
I think Mahishmati was also under Suta king branch.
Next to Mahishmati was Anup, which was Bhim's best friend Neel. Neel was a Suta.
Neel, that's what I said.
Yeah.
So a lot of them, right? So
there are two Neels here. Neel Anup and Neel Mahishmati.
Yeah. Neel Mahishmati.
So that, now second part. Now what they say, because he was of a lower jati, whatever, he was denied education. There they bring the Dronacharya myth, saying that Dronacharya said, because he's a lower jati, I will not teach, right? Again, completely wrong. Does Karna leave Dronacharya and go? Yes, absolutely. But that is his own decision. Dronacharya was a student of, Karna was a student of Dronacharya. It is very, very clearly mentioned in Adi Parva, and it comes in 2-3 places where Karna himself...
multiple times, in Kundalaran Parva also it is there.
Correct. That I'm Dronacharya's son, Dronacharya Shishya as well as Parshuram's Shishya, right? He says that.
Even Narada explains it to Yudhishthir that he was educated under Dronacharya.
Correct.
So it's multiple places and multiple people say it.
Correct. Multiple
Including
people say,
Karna
in
himself.
fact,
And Yudhishthir himself was educated under Drona and Bhargava. Vidur says that towards the end of the Sabha Parv, right?
in the
So
Adi Parva itself, it is very clearly mentioned that Duryodhana Samashritya, along with Duryodhan, what would
Yes.
Karna do? Avmanyat Pandavan. Always he would
Correct.
insult the Pandavas. Why? Because Ati Amarshana, he was very, very jealous, very, very
Jealous.
angry against Arjun to begin with. Yeah. So this is clearly mentioned that since then he did not like the Pandavas, and especially Arjun. So then he wanted the Brahmastra to get, and he asked Dronacharya, ki, "Arey, you teach me the Brahmastra." Dronacharya said, "You don't have the adhikar for it, so I can't teach you right now." He said, "Okay, then I'll go out and learn." That's why he goes. It's not as if somebody says no to him that he was not educated or anything like that. So another myth which is nowadays used to show that a caste system was always like this, always people were harassed. There was no meritocracy, they'll say, right? Because Karna was so meritorious, but there was no meritocracy. Why? Only because of his jati, he had to undergo all this. Only because of his jati, so much injustice happened. So I think this one myth around this whole jati pratha, the way it has been portrayed nowadays, is really, really very, very dangerous. Now, if you go back to Mahabharata, as all of you know, right, there are 4 varnas, yes, but there is no 4 jatis. There are multiple jatis because of mixing, right? And there are passages which come where the Nahush Prashna, it comes in Yaksha
Yes.
Prashna, that whole Brahman. And Yudhishthir says it multiple times that only and only through vritti, only and only through karma and swabhav, or rather the characteristic that one portrays, kshama, dama, shanti, arjava, all of that,
yeah.
and through vritti does one become a Brahmin. Nahush, in fact, asks him, right? But all these characters, the qualities that you're talking about could be in anybody. It doesn't only have to be in Jati Brahmin. And Duryodhan says, Yudhishthir says, you are very right. Anybody who shows these qualities is a Brahmin. So then Nahush says, then what is the point of birth? Does birth not matter at all? And Yudhishthir says, over time, there has been so much intermingling of 1:1 Jati Varna now that you really can't say that one Jati is the same as Varna. That much intermingling has happened now. So now, only through vritti, only through karma, and only through action can you really know what a Brahmin is. So this also comes like 2-3 times in Mahabharata. So, with things which we need to learn versus what we are actually learning, right? So creating a victim narrative rather than creating this philosophical narrative about our society.
Great. So
we have some questions from the audience. So this question talks about the relationship between Yudhishthira and the twins. The question says, in your book, you have mentioned that Kunti suggested Yudhishthira to love Nakula Sahadeva equally like his other brothers. Maybe you would like to quickly talk about this question.
So,
relationship between Yudhishthira
at any point in Mahabharata, we don't come across Yudhishthira taking sides or anything like that. There is a mention, especially in Yaksha Prashna, there is a mention when Duryodhana, all these names, right?
Yaksha asked
Yudhishthira is asked to save one of his brothers. He's answered all the questions of Yaksha, and now he has to save one of his brothers. So Dharmaraj asks Yudhishthira, who do you want to wake up? And there Yudhishthira says Nakul. And the explanation given is, my father had 2 wives, so it's only fair that both their sons are alive. So one, that shows the justice, the nyaya part of Yudhishthira. But there is one mention where then Yaksha says, but why Nakul? Why not Arjun? You know you will need him for the war. To succeed in the war, you will need him. And why not Bhim? He's your favorite. Right? So that is one where you get to know that probably Bhim and Yudhishthira shared a closer relationship, so to say, but that could also be just because they were almost the same age.
No, they were brothers. That's what I think is that people don't realize is that Pandu was not there. So for Yudhishthira, Arjun, Nakul, Sahadeva were like sons. Where you are also mentioning Kunti saying treat them like brothers. You are really treating them like children. You're not letting them, get their own wings, you can say. Bhim and they were brothers. The others were like children to him. And that's, I think, what comes across right across the story. He's always worried about Arjun. He's also worried about but about Bhim, he has no problem. Mother says, go and tackle Bakasur. Bhim can do it. You see, so that's where
But that's the thing. In fact, that Bakasur episode,
Yudhishthira was
not happy that Kunti sent Bhim, right? He's like,
yes.
You know that for our security, we need Bhim, and you are putting him in the mouth of death, right? So Yudhishthira is actually not happy when Bhim is sent, but
Correct.
Kunti is like,
Because
no, you must go.
he's again wondering about the other brothers. Yeah, he wants to protect the other brothers, right? Bhim is his shield,
Exactly.
right? And that's where the Draupadi also realizes, she basically bypasses Yudhishthira and goes to Bhim and says, "Kill Kichak," and knowing Bhim will and Yudhishthira will always forgive Bhim for everything, right?
No, in
So
fact, even in the Sabha, right? People say, "Arey, Yudhishthir asked Draupadi to keep quiet." But what he says, Kichak will be rightly punished. You go. He asks her to leave, but he says Kichak will be rightly. He does mention it at that point. He doesn't say, "No, forgive him and go. Nothing of yours," right?
yeah,
Then also
he tells
Yudhishthir has
Bhim also,
mentioned.
and he tells
But
Bhim,
then,
you go out and then uproot the tree. So basically, he's actually giving that permission also to Bhim right there and then in the same sequence.
so yeah,
So
and yeah, Bhim, of course, the most physically strong amongst all the brothers. That was there. The other thing about Bhim, I'd like to mention that people think of him as only somebody who knew Gada. That is not the case. He was actually good in Dhanush Ban and all of that also. So one of the greatest warriors along with Arjun, so to say.
I
Bhim
think
is
he was
story.
probably the second best on Pandava's side after
No,
Arjun
Satyaki.
in archery.
Satyaki.
I mean,
Satyaki was
yeah,
also very
Satyaki was also, yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. Like so in Skand Purana, things one of the things is like they actually have a discussion who killed most, where the Barbary issue comes in, right?
Yes, that barbaric
Yeah,
story
that
is
at
there.
that time Dushduman and Satyaki and Bhim and Arjun, all four basically supposed to have done that. Oh, another good question actually somebody asked was that were Pandavas non-vegetarians?
Yeah. All
Because they
Kshatriyas
kept
were
on changing,
non-vegetarians.
and
Let's accept
Mridusapan is the
all Kshatriyas were non-vegetarians, and there is a reason for that, right? Kshatriyas were supposed to go out and fight. They needed rajas. They had maximum, if you see Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, if you look at the Guna spectrum, Kshatriyas were supposed to fall in the Sattva Rajas category. Now you are what you eat, right? So one is to get that kind of Rajas, you needed to eat non-veg. So that is one. Second, the time there was that people hunted their animals and they ate. And it is very, very clearly mentioned both in Ramayana as well as Mahabharata. I don't even think we have to be touchy about this subject, which people tend to be.
and they had a crew of more than 200 people following them, 300 people following with them. So it's not like they imagine in the TV serial like 5 people and their wife going to the. It's not actually, they had a whole crew with them.
Whole retinue of people had gone with them. Plus,
honestly,
at that time, even vegetarianism, so to say, I don't think it was that big a concept. It was more like you eat what you are. So somebody has to go up much higher in the meditation, rishihood. They would probably be vegetarians, but others ate everything. It also has to do with the whole technology available for farming, this and that, all of that, right? Of course, that was there too. But eating non-veg was not a taboo. Now, what was the difference? I want to add that as well, right? The difference is that people did not breed animals just to kill them. It was more like you kill for your food. You hunt and you eat that, right? And you maintain that ecological balance. In fact, I'll use this question to give this very beautiful story, which I love. Yeah. So when they are in one of the forests, they're staying there for many years, and you guys go hunting and they eat the food. So one day, one of the animals comes in Yudhishthir's dreams. And he says, please go away from here because our lineage is ending. We are becoming extinct. You go away, let us flourish, and then you come back so that you can get more food here, else we'll end. Else our lineage will end, our species will end. And the very next day, Yudhishthir and guys, they leave that forest. Because it's right. You can't end the fauna, you can't end the lineage. It should
be the first environmentalist.
Correct. Yeah. Ecological balance has to be maintained. And that is actually what you get out of here. They left the forest immediately and went to another forest to ensure that lineage doesn't end, even though they were eating non-veg. Yeah.
So, Amiji, we have almost run out of time. Just one more last question. So I would like to invite Vijay Krishna. Vijay Krishna runs a social media page called as Bharat Narratives. So through this page, he's creating digital art about Ramayana and Vishnu Sahasrama. So he's bringing out the story of the Ramayana through graphics, and he's doing a great job promoting our culture. So he has a question for you. Over to you, Vijay.
Namaste, Amiji. Namaste, everyone. Deepak, Pranchu, Gauravji. It's good to see. So I'll keep my questions short. I had two questions, but one of them, fortunately, was answered on Yudhishthira pawning Devi Draupadi. Why did he do, or what was his mindset? The second question is about the most famous person in the Chandal Chakudi. That is Shakuni. So Shakuni, if we see the common perception and the visualization in the serials, is the arch enemy. He is portrayed as a bigger villain as compared to probably even Duryodhana, Karna, and most importantly, even Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra is shown to be a very lame person who is influenced, whereas that's not the case in the text. So, what is your view on Shakuni? How does he kind of evolve as a character? Though he might have participated very actively in the Duk Sabha, does he change? I mean, what are the signs of change over the times? Or was he a? In fact, let me put this question this way: was he a victim of his circumstances? Without taking out the blame.
Yeah. So let me restrict my answer to what is within Mahabharata, within Vyas Rachit Mahabharata that I know, right? Because there are many other narrative stories around Shakuni that are also floating around. I think the characterization of Shakuni in our mind, the vicious character, that's thanks to Goofy Panther. He's done an excellent role in Mahabharata, so to say, and that's sort of stuck in our head, right? That vicious character, limping and all of that. Frankly, in Mahabharata, there is no mention of his limping either. At least not that I have come across, right? So aisa kuch nahi hai. And is he vicious? Is he supporting? Is he a part of the Chandal Chokri? Definitely, right? Is he the one who's also encouraging Duryodhan in going ahead and fighting with the Pandavas, as in the initial part of it, right? So he is a part of the Lakshagraha episode, when the burning of the Pandavas, Duryodhan plans. All that he's a part of, right? But is he really as vicious as he's made out to be? Maybe not. So even in the Dyuta Krida episode, he is playing, he is encouraging Yudhishthir to keep staking, right? But he himself has not said anything wild to either of the Pandavas or even Draupadi, for that matter. He is not stopping anybody. He's sitting there, maybe enjoying, yeah. But he has not said anything that really is bad, like what say Karna has done, or the way Karna has instigated, right? In fact, there is an instance after Ghosh Yatra, which probably shows that Shakuni may have just played along with Duryodhan eventually, without really believing in what Duryodhan was doing. So this happens when in the Ghosh Yatra, what happens is the Gandhars, they capture Duryodhan. Karna has run away, right? Then the Pandavas are called and Pandavas sort of save Duryodhan and they let him go. Now Duryodhan is very, very hurt. His ego is hurt, right? They had gone to that forest to show these guys to show the Pandavas that he was much better off and the Pandavas were suffering. Instead, here the Pandavas themselves had to rescue Duryodhan. Unke karan se Duryodhan
and his family.
So he was very hurt. His ego was hurt. So after they move a little ahead, he's like, I am going to fast unto death. I don't want to go back. I cannot live with this kind of insult, what has happened to me, right? So I will fast unto death. At that point, people are trying to convince him, Ki, aise mat karo. Then there is this whole story about I'm not getting into that story, but at that point, Shakuni actually tells Duryodhan, he says, Arey, be a bigger man. Pandavas, in spite of the fact that whatever you did to them, today came to your rescue as brothers should have come to your rescue. Now you be a bigger man, give them Indraprastha. Don't be so hung up on this. Give them Indraprastha and end this. Be a bigger man, keep a larger heart, give it to them. Duryodhan doesn't listen. Duryodhan says, no, nothing doing. I'm going to kill myself. I cannot live with this. At that time, then our man Karna comes back. And he's like, Arey, why do you worry? They saved you. Of course, Karna was also trying to ensure that Duryodhan doesn't sit there and kill himself. He's trying to encourage him. So what Karna says is that they saved you. It is not any krupa. It's not any favor they've done to you. They are in your region. They are the citizens of Hastinapur. So they have only done what the citizens' job is, right? By saving the king. So it's no big upkar that is being done on you. So you don't take it to heart. Don't make it an ego issue. And you don't worry. Let the Vanvas and I am going to kill all the Pandavas. I will kill Arjun. So you come back. I am giving you assurance that I will do that. And Duryodhan is like, yeah, okay. Now Karna has said that. Right? So at that point, actually Shakuni has said that be a bigger man and give it. So I'm not so sure that eventually whether Duryodhan was even doing what Shakuni was telling him to do. It was more about then Shakuni playing along as per Duryodhan's and Karna's wills.
He was his uncle anyway, right? So I mean, So there's a delay in their publication, but Aditi's anthology hasn't come out yet. Otherwise, we could have done more discussion on this.
Okay, Abhijit, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an extremely engrossing and engaging session. So, in fact, we can go on for another 1 hour. I mean, there's
Yes,
so
I
much to
agree.
talk about the Mahabharata. So maybe we can have one exclusive session on your book itself instead of just about myths, because there's so much we can talk and discuss. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great pleasure interacting with you and especially hearing your views. And thank you so much, Gaurav, for joining us. And as usual, thanks to my fellow co-host Pranshu and to Vijay who have joined us. So thank you all once again for joining us. We have had a great session. So Amiji, anything you want to say before we close?
No, I'll just say as you can see, right, I get lost when I talk about this topic. It's very close to my heart. The best part of today's session was that you have people who know Mahabharata, right? Who can actually, who agree with me. Yes, I've gotten things like, "Arey, she hates Karna. She's biased against Karna. She's things that come." So it's so good to be with people who actually know it and are aligned with the views. So thank you so much for having me. Love this conversation.
One question somebody was insisting, just like this, somebody just said, mentioned that Vasu mentioned that SS Rajmouli is planning to make a series of movies on Mahabharata. So do you think we should be worried about getting myths more propagated?
Well, knowing Rajamouli, I think he gets good advisors who tell him what actually is in Mahabharata. I mean, I like Rajamouli's versions, right? So I would hope he actually does a better job rather than falling into the masala mode for it. But even then, I think we don't have to worry because now
We will have more sessions because of that.
That's true, right? That's true, exactly. We can do more. We can have more videos and create this whole channel, whole content that is more indic and more true to the narrative.
Maybe we can
Amiji,
ask
just
Rajamouli sir his views about Karn to
yeah,
find
yeah.
out whether we should be worried or not.
That's
That's a
Yeah,
test I have for.
I read somewhere that he's a fan of Karna, so let's see. We'll know when the movie comes out. Amiji, just to tell you about our show, we are covering 18 different myths. So we chose the number 18 because, as you know, it is supposed to be a magic number associated
For
with the
Mahabharata.
Mahabharata. So we have already covered 15 myths, so another 3 myths to go. And most of the points which we discussed today, we had already spoken about it. What we do is we present facts based on sources from Critical Edition, Dr. Debroy's translation, and also KMG. So thank you once again for reiterating all these facts, because coming from an author of the bestseller Mahabharata Unraveled, it helps to amplify what we have been doing all along. So once again, thank you so much. Thanks everyone, and have a great Sunday.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you for having me. Thank you.